What's the difference between broadcasting news on radio versus TV? Also, if you face the possibility of a change of career, having worked in the same organisation for over 25 years, how would you handle it? Let's find out. Welcome to Half Hour Mentor. It's Ian Cleverden here, and welcome to the final interview of this series in which we've dived into various aspects of the creative arts. We've spoken to musicians, actors, authors and others about their careers and what advice they would give someone wishing to pursue a career or develop their hobby in the wide-ranging fields of the arts and culture. If you're new to the series, please follow it on whichever streaming platform you use and go back and have a listen to the rich archive of over 30 interviews and compilations. I mentioned the word organisation in the introduction. That's probably incorrect, as today we're actually discussing a British institution, the British Broadcasting Corporation. I'm ending this series by chatting with a titan of the British broadcasting industry and the creative arts, none other than the ex-Director General of the BBC, Lord Tony Hall. Tony grew up in Birkenhead in Merseyside and after studying at university ended up working for the BBC in their Belfast newsroom at the height of the Troubles in the early 1970s. He worked his way up through the BBC, a journey of which you'll hear about today. He's also been Chief Executive of the Royal Opera House, Chair of the Board of Trustees for the National Gallery in London, and became a life peer in the House of Lords as a crossbench member in 2010, with a passion for supporting the development of arts and culture. I was thrilled when Tony agreed to make time to chat to me about his career journey, lessons learned, and also share his passion and thoughts for the future of the creative arts. Lord Tony Hall, thank you very much for joining Half Hour Mentor.
My pleasure.
I want to start off by asking you a question I ask all my guests at the start of the episodes, and that's going back to your teenage years. What was the very first job you wanted to do?
I wanted to be an archaeologist. I was absolutely fascinated by archaeology. My dad and mum used to take us up to Hadrian's Wall once a year to go visit an aunt who lived up there. And I was just fascinated by history and by finding out more about history. And that's what I wanted to be. And then when I went into the BBC, I was on The World Tonight, and I went to see a rescue archaeology team in Oxford, as it happens. And I said this to the guy who was running this rescue bid, and he said, "Do you know what's really involved in archaeology? You could be, a meter high in dark, horrible water. You don't know where it's been. There could have been rats or whatever doing stuff, or it's cold and you're scraping things away and all that." I still find an immense romance in archaeology and that sense of discovery and finding out about people's lives who are, remote from yourselves, but then suddenly you come across something which binds you to you in the present. So that's what I wanted to be. And then after that, I thought, no, I tried playing first violin, then guitar, and I thought this is not, I love it, but I'm never going to make a career out of that. And then I came on to broadcasting because I just love broadcasting. I think broadcasting matters. It's so important. And also, you can keep asking questions of people. I mean, I think curiosity is a great thing. I don't know about you, but I just think the ability to keep asking questions about life, about people, is so important. And broadcasting allowed me to do that. And other things I tried at university. And that's, by the way, one other thing is university. If you are lucky to go there, then I think it gives you I think the most important thing, of course, is your degree. But the most important thing, really, is the chance to experiment on things that then you can work out what you want to do. I mean, I remember directing plays. I wrote in reviews, did some student journalism. And it helps you to, without any great import, you can find out where you really do want to spend your time. So from archaeology, I ended up joining the BBC.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's that sort of extracurricular work that really helps you there. And I think one thing you said there too about archaeology, in a way, the discovery aspect, you've done that through your career, which we'll examine shortly, just, through news and, everything else.
I just think that's one of the great things about life, is learning stuff you don't know, and finding yourself in positions where you sometimes feel a bit uncomfortable, but you're finding out new things. And I think the problem with life is it's too short, and there are too many things that you really want to know and get involved in, I think, and that's both exciting and also a challenge. So that led me off into broadcasting and journalism, and because you can keep asking questions. The most important thing is curiosity, isn't it?
Absolutely. Well, let's explore that now, because I know you went to Oxford, didn't you? Do is it philosophy, politics, economics, PPE? And then straight into news and straight into the BBC. But it was Belfast, I think you started, wasn't it, in the newsroom?
I did. Well, I was amazingly lucky. One, because going to university, I'm the first in my family to go to university. It was all paid for by the local authority. No student loans, none of that stuff, because my parents couldn't have afforded to send me. So, wasn't I lucky there? And then I went to the BBC. And again, I think the thing I feel worried about, generations now, is it's all so much more uncertain. I mean, I think we were a lucky generation who felt, we were going to end up being employed, you didn't think you weren't going to end up being employed. And the BBC was tough to get into. The training scheme, I think there were 400 people applying or something like that. And there were 6 of us got through. I have to say, we've just had a reunion 50 years ago. We all joined 50 years. Where the hell's that gone? And we had all the training in television and in radio, in journalism, in law, all sorts of things. And then we were sent off on attachments to a variety of places. And I was really lucky enough to go to Belfast. And I love going to Northern Ireland now. I like it enormously. Belfast is transformed. But then you were going into what was effectively a war zone, called the Troubles, of course. And to go from Oxford, where you've been doing a lot of theory, a lot of reasoning stuff, BBC, where you were doing a lot of training and, again, a lot of theory and practice and all that, to go into somewhere where, I remember so vividly, you had to be careful taking a camera out of the car, because if you did that, things could happen. People would say, as a camera, okay, let's now have a situation or a riot or anything like that. And suddenly you had to think so hard about every word you wrote, about what you said, about how you position things, because it could lead to something catastrophic.
From your own personal point of view, as well as from the BBC's responsibility.
Well, there's that, but to be honest with you, you're more thinking about what could the result on other people be of you getting something wrong. And, could it be a riot or worse? Your own personal safety, of course, as well. But when you look back now, there's the most brilliant series on the BBC about Northern Ireland, with people just talking about the Troubles back then. And you sort of forget just how bad it was and how dark it was. And now, thank God, Belfast, I think, is a terrific city. Derry is transformed. London Derry is transformed, and a beautiful city. And it's really, really good, I think. So you learnt a lot, and to go from the academic is the wrong way of putting it, but from that into something very, very real and very hard, I think I learned a huge amount. I was phenomenally lucky, and it was a great experience looking back on it. And I'm just so relieved now that things in Northern Ireland are not perfect, but so much better, so much better.
Absolutely. So what attracted you to stay in news? Because, we'll talk about just your rise through that and being, director of it within your time at the BBC. But what was the thing that really attracted you about news in itself?
I think a number of things. One is curiosity. And second thing is... I was talking to someone yesterday who is much younger than me, but had been working on World at 1 on PM. And I think if you're outside broadcasting, you might not realise this, but the excitement of coming into the office at about 7:30, looking through papers, listening to various bulletins, and then from about 8:15 onwards, having to put together a programme. You have nothing. Put together a programme of, then it was half an hour, then it became 40 minutes, I think, by 1 o'clock, and then do the same thing again at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. It's brilliant, because you just think, wow, what can we do? And how do we schedule the program? And then something happens at 5 to 1 or 5 to 5, which means you have to reinvent the whole thing again. So there's a, and then the same thing applies in television with Newsnight or the Newses. There's a visceral excitement, which is a bit of a drug in a way. And I used to love it when stories happened and you could just throw the whole program up in the air and start again and find out what's going on, So there's excitement. of it. And then the other thing is, people say, oh, you were in the BBC for 27 years. Truth is, you do so many different jobs. You work. I mean, I was lucky enough to be in the radio newsroom and learnt stuff. I went down to Parliament for the first broadcasting experiment. I came back and did World at One, Today, World Tonight, worked on all those programs. Then moved across to I took a demotion to go across to television because I wanted to learn about television. So I took a cut in status to do that because I thought, I want to learn about TV as well. So I went across to Newsnight. I was the output editor every other day throughout the Falklands War. And then after that, there was a big revolution in News and Current Affairs when John Burt came in from the outside and brought together all the disparate bits of news into one big division or directorate, as it was then called. And I was promoted to run news. So I'd always been chasing new programs. I loved setting up new things. And then I found myself in this position with no management training, by the way. Suddenly you're running this, it took me, I think, about 2 years to say to them, I would quite like some management training. And they packed me off to London Business School. And then I went across to Wharton Business School in the States for 3 months. But that was all kind of, I was already doing the job, really. And then I was so lucky to run news for about 10 or 11 years. And just the other change thing which is interesting about this is, at that point, the whole view of change of how news should be broadcast was beginning to change. Because audiences, were saying, okay, we'll watch the 9 o'clock news, as it then was, or the 5:40 news, or the 6 o'clock news. But technology was changing to make news available whenever you want. So CNN at that point was called chicken noodle news. People thought, it'll never catch on. Of course it would, because audiences say, why do I have to wait for 9 o'clock or now 10 o'clock for the news? I want it whenever I can get it.
Well, this would be around about the start of the internet as well, I suppose.
Yeah,
sort of mid-90s, yeah.
Spot on. So it was really, for me, exhilarating to say, how do we match what we're doing with the changes in technology, which is allowing us to give audiences what they want, effectively when they want it. And so that meant I set up a number of things. It was 5 Live, News 24, as it then was called. And then the thing that everybody said, oh, that'll never catch on, which was BBC News Online. And the key to this, because there was people saying to us, there's not enough news to keep going for 24 hours a day, which kind of misses the point. And there's also the stresses on people saying, well, I'd quite like to spend the day crafting something carefully for 10 o'clock at night or 9 o'clock at night, as then was. And now I'm having to sort of go and broadcast live and do all that sort of stuff. So it was a huge revolution in the way people work. And we were changing to match what our audiences wanted us to do. And I think it's funny. What I learned from that was, and I apply it to organizations that I'm lucky enough to be working with now, which is you've got to start outside yourself. You've got to start with how people are consuming what it is you do. And the problem with organizations is the flywheel is so rapid. Running, I've got to do this, got to do that, And the pressures on you are so intense that you've just got to have to look outside that and say, look, if we've got to change, then we have to change to match how people are seeing us and consuming or enjoying what we do. And I think that outside perspective is phenomenally important. And actually, in the pressure of just running things, is kind of really difficult to get hold of. But you've got to do it. Always look outside at what's going on. Scan the horizon, see what's coming up as well, which is important.
That's right.
So
your enthusiasm is obviously just coming through here, and it just says it's coming through every pore in terms of really enjoying what you did. One benefit, I don't know if you're aware actually, because I used to work in financial services, worked in one of the major banks, and at the time when TV screens went in banking halls, it actually did a lot to manage. As we're having BBC News, News 24 as was, it did a lot to manage the people queuing up. So if you had a large queue, it actually calmed people down because they could watch the Trailblazer at the bottom or watch the subtitles that you put up on the screen. That actually helped customer service.
Social purpose. This is really good. It's a bit like when I was at the Opera House. I used to come up from the Bakerloo line every day into Charing Cross Station, and TfL not experimented but played classical music to people at the tube station because they found it made people feel calm down. And actually, it's really important, that, isn't it? I mean, it's a bit like we discovered, if we needed to discover, I mean, I didn't need to discover it, but people discovered the importance of landscape and greenness and all of that during COVID. These are things we know. But I've never heard of the news channel being a way of calming down queues. But I love it. But it keeps you occupied. It gives you something to look at, doesn't it?
That's right. Yeah, it wasn't intentional. Certainly, as far as I was aware. But it was a sort of byproduct, if you like, because it just helped you think, oh, I'll keep my focus on that. I didn't realise that was happening. Cashier number 4, please, or whatever. Then okay, right.
I suspect what you were doing then is very like a news journalist now, which is it's also having to respond quickly. Every situation is difficult, is different, and potentially difficult or potentially easy. And you're wrestling with all sorts of issues to do with, not just are you getting it right, and it's much more complicated now. Are you getting things right? But also, are we in the right places? What's the right balance between stuff that you put in a news program? Are we getting this right? Are we getting to the big issues, the things that really kind of matter? Or are we on trivia? Do we need people to feel celebratory about something? It's really interesting.
Absolutely. One question I wanted to ask you, because it's something that I've debated and been asked in the past, and you've done both roles, is what's the difference, whether it be TV or on radio, of a producer and an editor?
It's a ranking thing, really. I mean, I think an editor in the end is responsible. So if you're editing a program, you're responsible for all the output and making sure that the producers are doing kind of what you want. So, it's a bit of rank. To be honest with you, I think the most important thing in anything in life, really, but particularly in broadcasting of the sort of news programs that we're talking about, is the team and the makeup of the team. And I never thought there was any particular rank in that. In the rank comes in if you've got something really, really difficult, then you'd go to your editor and say, what do you think? Do we do this? Do you do that? Or whatever. But, to make a news program work, you just need everybody working together and really coming together to think what is best for this program. How do we kind of can you do this? Can you do that? And if you look at almost anything, making a production, an opera production or a ballet, again, it's how people, an orchestra, it's how people come together to do things which they could not do on their own. And when I first joined the BBC, there was a man, one of the trainers, who's a deep mid-European accent called Eric. And he said, remember that so many people have to work to make you look good when you do your program, and make sure you thank them. And I found that it's always stuck with me. He was right about that. That getting the team to come together and to work is important. And if you're leading something, at the other top end of an organization, again, how that team comes together and can talk about things and can discuss things and can be open about it. And by the way, when things go wrong, can also be open about how you get those things right without feeling endangered or in some ways, God, if I put my hand up and say I got that wrong, I'll be for the chop. You've got to get that culture where a team can work effectively, I think.
Yeah. What's the difference in that between TV and radio? Because you said you went off to TV for a bit to sort of see what that was like. What is the difference?
Well, then I stayed in TV, really. I love television. It's so much more complex. I mean, the thing about radio is it's a bit like this podcast now. Radio is a conversation. And I think that's why podcasts do so well, because it's taken the idea of a radio program and pushed it further into the informal chat. So you hope, if anyone's listening to this, that they feel they're part of the conversation, if you know what I mean. In television, you can't feel that because, the screen is there, you're removed from it. And to make television, I mean, if you want to change a program on television like Newsnight, when I was running, working on Newsnight, it's so much more complex. So many more people have to know what you want to do. Just think about, you've got all the people in the gallery, you've got all the people, the camera people down here, you've got all the people out in the field, you've got so on. It's much, much harder, and therefore I think can be less intimate. I mean, it obviously is less intimate. On the other hand, the power of pictures is phenomenal. I think the power of audio description can be huge. If you think about Seamus Heaney doing Beowulf, and he just starts with a soul, and you're into this story, and you're away. With television, you think of Attenborough, for example, and being able to show you what's happened in his lifetime on this present series. The power of that is unforgettable. So television is such a powerful medium, and I love it. And I just think they're very different things, and you just need to recognise that.
Yeah, gives that extra dimension, doesn't it? It's the visual.
Completely. And the thing which unites both, and the thing which I think is common to all that we're doing, we're all storytellers, aren't we? We want to tell stories, and you could write a story, you can do an audio story, which, as I said, with the Heaney and Beowulf, there's an intimacy to it, which is stunning. And then you can tell a story with television, and you're going to be completely into it if it's good. And I just think it's storytelling that unites all these things, and then you have to adapt it to the art form. Is it a play? Is it a TV drama? Is it whatever?
Yeah, absolutely. So then when it got to 2001, you'd had all that success in putting all those media together, the news channel that is still there, BBC News online app that's turned into an app, it's still there, 5 Live, etc. Then you joined the Royal Opera House as chief executive. So probably 2 questions there. Firstly, why the move? And secondly, I know that you did a lot to bring it to the masses within that. Tell us a little bit about what your strategy was.
Yeah. So I mean, I'll be blunt. There I was age 48 or something, or 49, 50. And John Burt left as Director General. I put my name forward to be Director General. I didn't get it. And I thought, I think I was at that point 49. And I thought, what do I do? Do I kind of stay on here? And Greg Dyke was very nice and said, stay on, run news, there's a lot to do and all that. And I thought, yeah. But hang on. And, I'd done 27 years of BBC, and I thought, I'll just snip around and see whether I can do something completely different. And the Royal Opera House had been through some crisis, a series of crises. And I ended up finding myself being offered the job, the 5th chief executive in 4 years at the Royal Opera House, because I love music. I loved opera. To be frank, I enjoyed ballet, but didn't know a great deal about it. So the ballet company were fantastic at teaching me a whole lot of stuff. And I absolutely loved it. And it was one of those kind of Shakespearean things where all the stuff that was being said about the Opera House was basically bad. They'd taken a lot of money from the lottery, and it was being wasted, as it were, on these very toffy people, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought, no, hang on. You walk into this place; it's full of amazing, creative people working their socks off to do something really, really good. And these are art forms that everybody should have access to. So, I had to first of all kind of, pull everyone together. And then we had a couple of brilliant artistic people, Tony Pappano for the opera, Monica Mason for the ballet, just first rate. And then the question then I had is, how do you run the place and financially, all that sort of stuff? But all, and that needed all reconstructing. But also, how do you get this out to as many people as you can? How could I, in Birkenhead, have accessed the Royal Opera, the Royal Ballet? And, there's a whole lot of things there. Price was obviously important. Education was really important. Just the sense that when you walk into the place, you feel welcome, because people feel, off-put by, these are big doors and it says Opera House. Am I going to be okay? What do I wear? Am I going to be all right? Well, people, all that stuff. You have to sort of bash some of those barriers down and then try some experiments. We had big screen relays out into Trafalgar Square and then around the country where people could just watch it for nothing. We had cinema relays where people could come and just see it again for a small amount of money, but it's kind of extending reach. We did a deal with the Sun newspaper, which the opera writers said will never work. You won't get new people. Well, we got 92% of the people who came. They had to be Sun readers, came, 90%, because we did all the data. We're new to the Opera House, and we had to put up with the Sun newspaper headlines. The opera was Don Giovanni, so the Sun did a headline saying, "Well done, my son," which is ghastly, but, we got the people in. And then I also set up a place where we would make our sets and paint our backcloths and more out at Thurrock in the Thames Gateway, which is, Thurrock is half an hour on the Fenchurch Street line out into Essex, but could be a million miles away from Covent Garden and the Opera. And we set up this campus out there. Kids from the schools could come through and see stuff being made. I hope that would inspire them to think this could be me. I could do stuff backstage or do things musical. We set up a chorus out there with the community and all this stuff. And the council tax leaflet went out. This is weird, but saying Thurrock, home to the Royal Opera House. And I thought, this is magic, because the power of art, culture, the backstage stuff can actually involve a whole lot of communities in things that they otherwise wouldn't have been involved in. So the strategy was actually dead simple, Ian, really. It's just saying, how do you take great things and give them to as many people as you can, and excite as many people as you can. And if they say, by the way, don't really like it, fine. But they've had the choice. And I think the important thing with education now, which is I think it's much harder, is, all kids from whatever background, should have access to great art, great culture. And they'll either say, not for me, I prefer football, or they'll say, wow, that's something, and it may be light a fire. Or the fire will be lit and the flames will come up 10 years later.
And it can allow that, getting that foot in the door. So, if you were even just perhaps the cleaner in the Royal Opera House, but then you're singing away and somebody says you've got a great voice, then the training can go into that. That's how a lot of large organisations work. If you start at the bottom, if you are good enough, you will rise through, providing you're given the support. Completely right.
And there are singers who have done exactly that, Ian. But the other thing which always struck me about the Opera House is you go into the finance department and, full of people doing finance stuff. And then you'll suddenly find there is someone there who's playing cello for an opera group. And why are they there? Because they're doing finance, but also because they love the idea of being in this creative place. And it is so exciting. I mean, if I got sort of feeling a bit low about things, what am I doing? I'm doing, as you do with any job, you have your low points. I just wander down and watch a rehearsal or whatever, or just go and see the people who are doing the costumes or the wigs or whatever, and you just think, this is brilliant, and it kind of inspires you. Yeah. Get out of the office is a key lesson for that.
Absolutely. So time after that, I think 2013, you went back to the BBC, but this time as Director General. What was the difference? I mean, how that's obviously a massive strategic, it can be a political role, compared to what you did in the BBC previously. How did you feel about sort of going back and approaching it in that way?
Well, it's such a good question, because I once I'd left the BBC, I didn't want to go back. I never thought of ever going back. And then the crisis happened over Savile and a Director General who resigned after 54 days. And then I got the call. Actually, I was doing a fundraising event in Rome, and got the call from the then chair of the BBC, Chris Patton. Would I come back and sort out this mess, because it had dissolved, really, the organisation, and I mean that. So it was a crisis. So I'd done the crisis at the Royal Opera House. I'd been through some other crises as well. And other organisations, and I thought I should go back because I love the BBC. And your question is so interesting, because I was 10 years away, 11, 12, maybe 12 years away, I can't remember now, 11 years. And people get to say, of course, the BBC, so, you know what to do, won't you? And I said, well, do you know what? It's changed so much in a decade. So I'm actually an outsider, but I know about it, so I'm an insider. So I'm an insider-outsider, and that was a really useful position to be in. And I think the most difficult thing I've ever done in my life is to work out how we would respond as an organisation to Jimmy Savile. And, I had to decide what we'd say when the final report on how the BBC had acted. I have to say, the BBC was one part of the Savile catastrophe. There were other organisations as well, but, I had to respond for that. And I met some of the people who I thought were victims and said, no, we're not victims, we're survivors. I talked to them at some length. And then was able to, I hope, give an apology for the BBC and what had happened in the past. So kind of, but then at the same time as doing that, we had to prepare for a new charter renewal. So the BBC's charter came up for renewal. There hadn't been any work done on that, so I had to get that together. I had to put together a team and bring in new people. So it was a fundamental job of building up the BBC again from where it had been. But, I did it because I thought it mattered, and people were kind enough to say, you've got to go back and do this. The BBC needs you, as it were. You've got to save it. And I felt that was what I should do. So it was part duty, I suppose, but an awful lot of love for the organisation. I think it really matters. And I feel strongly that it's a bit like to preserve something that you really feel is important, you've also got to change. It's The Leopard, isn't it? It's that novel. And I think that's what I felt about the BBC.
Absolutely. And obviously that sort of speaks for itself in the way that the organisation has transformed over the last few years. But you're now in the House of Lords as well, were at the time, but within that, How do your passion is so obvious that's coming through here, and for creative arts and so on. How can you get that voice of supporting the creative arts out through Parliament and the House of Lords?
Well, I'm sitting on a select committee. There are two really good things about the House of Lords. One is the work of the select committees. These are committees that just look at topics and they don't look at a department, they look across a topic. So I'm on this committee doing communications. I was on a committee looking at youth unemployment, again, interesting. And the reports that come from these cross-party committees should really get a lot more attention, because they really are thoughtful and really good. And I think that's a good role of the House of Lords. And I think the second role of the House of Lords is looking at legislation, some of which is loose, to put it mildly, to looking at how the legislation can be better framed, better articulated, be clearer. And, there are some brilliant lawyers in the House of Lords who really do make a hell of a contribution there. So, I'm now saying I'll use my position. For example, I'm working up in Birkenhead, that if I can give a plug, Will is going to be Borough of Culture for Merseyside next year, just to sort of support, advise, whatever I can do to help promote the arts and culture, which I profoundly believe in. And I want to use, my time in the Lords to both do that and also to talk about decent media, good broadcasting, because I think we need things that are almost part of the national infrastructure that we've got to think about, shape, change where necessary, but are part of what makes the UK a great place to be. And, for example, with broadcasting, you saw that in COVID. You had an organisation, I was lucky enough to be running the BBC at that time, it could just turn on a sixpence, if people remember what sixpences were, turn on a sixpence and start doing things that would really help people. I think, likewise, music was, again, core to people's well-being in getting through COVID and stuff. And arts and culture, it was sad that museums and galleries had to close, because I think that was the time to keep them open and let people in a few at a time. Because again, in times of trauma, never mind good times, you need art, you need culture. This is who we are. It's what actually helps us to see ourselves and feel part of something bigger. It really matters.
Well, as ever, time is upon us within the half hour that we have here. I've got one final question for you, and that is, and I ask this of all my guests, and that's, knowing what you know now, with all that experience, what one piece of advice would you give that teenage, perhaps even the trainee at the BBC starting off self?
I think the biggest thing we've got to do is to hang on to an idea of hope that things can be better and that people can make things better. In other words, show how people coming together, working as teams, working on, it could be music, it could be, I'm now chairing a social work charity, that you can make life better for more people. And I think that's fundamentally important. And those could be small steps or they could be huge steps. But I think we live in a world, sadly, where people think increasingly, and sometimes I do too, do you know what, it's all beyond this. It's all too big. It's all too difficult. Things are just getting worse. And I think we've got to fight back against that and say, no, there is a good world for people. Opportunities should be given to people. I had opportunities. I've been so lucky to have those opportunities because, I came from a primary school and all that stuff. Giving people opportunities in that sense that it can be different and you can make a difference to make life better for more people, and that people can have access to culture, creativity, and they can do new things. All that stuff is so important. So I think that's a rather long-winded message back to my junior self, but I do believe that hope is so important.
Lord Tony Hull, thanks very much for joining Half Hour Mentor.
That's my pleasure. Really enjoyed it.
I'm sure you'll agree with me that Tony gave us a fascinating insight into the world of broadcasting, especially relating to the differences between radio and TV news. I was also intrigued to learn about his fork in the road late in his career. It's something that many people face, given how working patterns have evolved over the years. And it was refreshing to hear that the same thought process applies even at executive level. I've also lost count of the number of my guests who have said they were lucky in their careers. There's obviously an element of being in the right place at the right time, but you still have to work hard to make your own luck, in my opinion. My thanks go to Tony for his time and great insights into the world of broadcasting. You can tell he has a great sense of humour, and if you'd like to see this in action and you're based in the UK, go and watch the very last episode of the third and final series of W1A on BBC iPlayer. He makes a great cameo appearance involving Doctor Who's TARDIS, but I'll leave you to find out what happens. Well, that's almost it for this series. One thing I did with all of my guests in Series 3 is to ask them some quick-fire questions at the end of each recorded interview, ones that I'd not told them about. This resulted in some hilarious answers, and I'll be releasing a couple of short compilation episodes featuring these as a finale to this series over the next few weeks. Make sure you subscribe to the series wherever you get your pods in order to be notified of their release. Well, that's it for this episode, and until next time, bye for now.